Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me here on Tao of the Day. I'm so grateful to have you with me, and I am open to take your number between 1 and 81. So, why between 1 and 81? Because there are 81 verses in the Tao Te Ching, and this talk is all about how to live a more reasonable life, how you can be more reasonable in your life through the teachings and the writings of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. So, what is the Tao? The Tao is, a lot of people want to say, so is Tao God? And yeah, sure, we could talk about Tao as God, although God, in so many people's eyes, is the masculine dude in the sky that kind of controls so much of what we do, and he's got a chip on his shoulder and he wants you to praise him, and he's got all of this sort of stuff. He's not interested in your freedom as much as he's interested in you doing what he says so that you can get into his house. And that is, the Christian triune God sort of thing. um but I don't always like to liken Tao to God because of those connotations. If we can open our mind to what God is, and that, like, you know, um, it says, they say, in so many religions, God is in everything. And I say, well, get rid of the in, and then you got it right. God is everything. Right? You are God. I am God. This tree out here is God. My computer is God, and everything is God. And if we treat everything as that, as if everything is God, the greed in the world is God, the generosity in the world is God, and all of that, then we're getting close to what is Tao. So in these 81 verses, we have so many different ways of looking at how to live a reasonable life. Yesterday, I went over a couple verses, and I believe, was it yesterday? Maybe it was the day before. I don't know. But it was wonderful to be able to go through some of these. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick number 2 for myself today. Two, I entitled, and this is going to be my translation of the Tao Te Ching, and one that's going to be out for and available for purchase at some point, soon ish. It's going to be available for purchase in Spanish and English, and then it will also be available as an Oracle deck. But what we have here in number 2 is identifying the manifestation. So this is coming off of the heels of verse 1, which is expressing Tao. And when we talk about expressing Tao, it talks about the idea that, well, no matter what we say, you're not going to really get close to what God is. We're not going to really get close to what Tao is. You can't express Tao because Tao is such a all-encompassing thing that you can't grasp Tao. So, what we have in coming off the heels of that, we start to notice that in verse 2, it's titled identifying manifestation. So maybe what we're going to start to do is like when you use words, you're identifying things. If you can recognize where you identify things, you can see where you're missing the mark when it comes to connecting with Tao. Opposites exist amongst the particular. Identifying the beautiful creates the ugly. Identifying the good creates evil. Identifying the particular separates all manifestations. Reality and fantasy are opposing thoughts. Difficult and easy are opposing degrees. Long and short are opposing perceptions of time and space. Because of this, the master doesn't rely on words. She teaches by being without explanation. In this way, she is the most helpful. She inspires all things to be without rejecting them. She gives them life, but refuses to possess them. Her actions spring forth from perfection. They are not her own. They are not hers to own. Thus, they will never be forgotten. So, what we have here, just as an overview, right? What we have here, just as we kind of look at this, is we have this initial idea that, like, we can create opposites by identifying things. Right? So identifying anything creates its opposite. If you believe yourself tall, well, that's because you have witnessed other things that are short. Right. So one to the other. If you were 3 feet tall and you believe yourself tall, and you start to meet people, you start to redefine what you think tall is, and you realize, well, actually, you're short. Now you have to change your ideas of how you define those words and how you define those feelings, but that's what's going to end up happening. So opposites exist amongst the particular. That's the thing that we start with, right? This whole thing starts with opposites exist among the particular, and then it starts to talk later on, and we'll get there, that the master doesn't rely on words. She teaches by being without explanation. Right? So opposites exist among the particular. As soon as you start to explain something, you start to focus on the particular. As soon as you start to come up with some why something happened, you start coming up with the particular. None of that matters. None of that matters because the reality is the opposite is probably also true. And so why does it matter? There is no why. There is no there is no particular, because as soon as you create a particular, you've created its opposite. Might as well just accept things as they are without having to be particular about it, without having to identify it as good or bad or right or wrong or hard or short or long, whatever. Soft, easy, all of those things. See, and in the end here, we're going to go through this line by line. I just want to kind of go over this as a whole. Like, her actions spring forth from perfection. They are not hers to own. So you don't own your actions, no matter how much you might think, like how much your ego wants to think you're important. You don't own your actions. Those actions are springing forth from perfection, and that's you when you get out of the way of yourself, right? Like, not that you're like, if you're in the way of yourself, that is Tao also, and so that's why it's really hard to talk about these things, because it's really about where you are internally and where you are and how you are being open in this moment. So, how do I want to go through this? We'll just go through it line by line, right? Like, so that's the easiest way to do this. So, opposites exist amongst the particular. So, as soon as we have a particular thing, we have its opposite. Right? Identifying the beautiful creates ugly. Identifying good creates evil. So, once you identify something, right? That's once you give something an identity, once you figure out what is particular about a thing, and that's one thing we all like to do, right? Like, why me? Why me? Why me? I'm particular. No, kind of, you're not. You can just be here without there having to be a why me. So that's a big thing, and I think that's a really tough thing for everybody. I mean, it's not easy for me, definitely. Like, I definitely want to know why I'm special, right? But opposites exist among the particulars. So as soon as you create why you're special, guess what else you're going to find? Why you're not special. And you're going to fight with that every time, because every time you search for something, why are you special? Well, you're going to find out exactly why you're not. Why do you deserve love? Well, you're going to see all the things why you don't. Why? Because opposites exist among the particular. As soon as you find a particular thing, you will discover its opposite, probably before you actually discover what you're looking for. Because in order to see what you're looking for, you have to see the opposite. You have to see why you're seeing it. Like, if you're 3 foot tall and you say, okay, well, I'm tall. Well, that's because you recognized it. Now, if you've never been anywhere, if you've never seen yourself in relation to anything else, if you've existed in a space without light for your entire life, would you even care if you were tall? Would you care what you looked like? Would you care about any of those things? Probably not, because you wouldn't have reference to anything particular. So you wouldn't see that, like, you wouldn't see what you look like. So you wouldn't know if you're beautiful or ugly. You wouldn't see anything. You would just be in the dark. And being in the dark would just kind of give you this experience, and you wouldn't have the light to know the difference. So, once again, opposites exist among the particular. So, as soon as you find a particular, you're probably focused on the opposite as well. Identifying the beautiful creates ugly, identifying the good creates evil. Identifying the particular separates all manifestations, right? It's identifying the particular thing separates everything, right? That's when things start to separate. Once you've identified things, you look at something and you say, okay, well, that is a thing versus this being a non-thing, right? Like this is a tree and this is air around it, right? Like you start to separate. Once you see it, you identify it. Can you stop identifying? Can you see the air and the tree and the earth and yourself as the same thing? Can you get beyond identifying things? And can, like, even people that love trees, they hug them, right? Like they step up to them. I mean, I used to date someone, Sarah, who would hug trees and hold them and look up at them and talk to them and stuff. And that was great. You know, that was very cute and all of these things. But there is this space where it's like, well, that is still identifying this one tree versus every other one tree, every grain of sand, every, like, it's like, be here now, love this now, whatever this is. And that tree exists within your shirt, that tree exists within this program, that tree exists within my computer, that tree, because that tree isn't particular, that tree is just cells that formed into a tree. So, and I've identified it as such. Now, can I step back enough and not identifying the particulars separates all manifestations. And then we have this kind of triad of reality and fantasy are opposing thoughts. Difficult and easy are opposing degrees. Long and short are opposing perceptions of time or space. You know, matter and wave are opposites, right? Like, um, and we look at, air versus like solid, liquid, and gas are three different states of form, right? Like, are differing states of form, and so, like, that's all really important to understand, that like everything is connected. And once we identify one thing, once we identify reality, right? Like, I worked with a lot of clients that have said, like, well, I'm a realist, I look at things from a realistic point of view. And it's like, well, your realistic point of view has a lot to do with things that you're not being aware of in terms of how you perceive the world. So it's really important to be able to recognize that we're identifying these things, and by identifying these things, we are locking ourselves into a particular way of thinking. So this is, as we move into the next verse, because of this, the master doesn't rely on words, because every word has an opposite, because everything has its other thing. She doesn't rely on words. And so if you don't rely on words, whether in thought or in vocalizing, if you don't rely on words, you can just be here present, then you can accept this for this moment for what it is without having to identify. She teaches by being without explanation. In this way, she is the most helpful. If she were to do something and someone says, well, why did you do that? If she were to explain why she did that, and I find myself, very frustrated when people want me to. I find myself often frustrated, not very frustrated. It's sometimes it comes up when people ask me to explain why I did something. Like, I remember one time I was having dinner with my friend Amanda, and she was really excited because I had said, "Oh, well, can we have spinach for dinner?" Because she was like, "I have these two types of greens, and I have to eat greens all the time," and she knows that. And she was like, "Well, I have kale and I have spinach." And I said, "Oh, well, let's have spinach." And she was like, "Oh, I'm really excited that you chose spinach because you don't ever make choices like that. You don't ever choose one thing over another. And you chose spinach, so you like spinach better." And I was like, "No, that's not why I chose spinach." And and at that moment I had to explain, and it was frustrating for me to have to explain this a bit. But I had to explain that, look, I chose spinach because of a lot of other variables. Um, one, like, I didn't feel like kale, but I can tell you why I don't feel like kale, because I've eaten kale recently and my diet is as such that these things are have to blah 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 blah, and I have to go into all of this litany of like why this is the thing. And I also know that no matter how much I explain, it's not really it. But so many times people want to just kind of like lump you down into this one experience you didn't like, so you don't like it. And it's like, no, that doesn't work, right? Like I wouldn't want Amanda going out and buying spinach for me every time we had dinner, because I don't really want to have spinach every time we eat, right? And so here's the thing, like once you rely on words and you say yes, let's have this, like there can easily be, you know uh like that's why teaching without explanation is such a interesting way of looking at it, right? Like, don't explain that you like it or don't like it or whatever. It's just, let's have this now, and that's good, you know and oftentimes we have to check ourselves also in trying to put other people in boxes and say, well, they didn't like this, so because they didn't like it this time, they don't like it, and I don't want to contribute to that, right? I don't want to contribute to their not liking it. So like, if I like Amanda could have very easily gone out and said, okay, well, I'm not going to get kale because Martin doesn't like kale because he chose spinach over kale. It's like, no, that's not the case at all. Like, that's not what I'm trying to say. Like right? And this is why, as soon as you have an explanation for something, like, you start to pigeonhole yourself into a box, and we can't be held in a box, right? No matter who we are, no matter what we, no matter, like, no matter if we feel like we are a partner, if we feel like we are a friend, or if we feel like we're male or female or whatever, you can't fit yourself into a box. And it's so great that we can't fit ourselves into a box, and yet that's what we go out and try and do all the time. We're just like, I'm a podcaster, and I'm a, like, and I'm an entrepreneur, and like, oh, no, you're more than that, right? We're all more than that, right? Like, we all, like, I'm saying those things here on Wisdom because that's what everybody has to say here on Wisdom, right? It's just that I'm a podcaster, and I'm an influencer, and I'm a this and I'm a that. And it's just like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Get on with your bad self, right? Like, and it's like, like teaching, but being without explanation. That's how one teaches, by being without explanation, by being able to just do what you do without having an explanation about it. You don't need an explanation to be who you are. You don't need an explanation to like what you like, even if you forever don't like marshmallows and then eat them one day. It doesn't matter. That's okay. You don't have to have an explanation. And by not having an explanation, you're actually teaching, because people are witnessing, right? Like, when we're children, this is one of the things I talk to my clients about a lot, is this idea of, like, when you're a child, nobody is teaching you anything, but you're learning a lot. And then when you get older, you blame everybody for having taught you stupid shit that you decided to learn, right? Because, like, that's not your, like, you think after you go to school that you're being taught shit. Ain't nobody teaching you nothing. You're observing. And that's how the teacher understands people learning. People learn through observation. So teach by being without explanation. And in this way, she is the most helpful. Do not explain what you're doing or why you're doing it. I mean, maybe you can, whatever. You can do what you want. But, like, this is what the master does, because the master understands that there are opposites amongst all particular things. So as soon as you discover an opposite, as soon as you discover a particular thing, if you like something, well, guess what? There's an opposite out there, and you just created something you don't like, right? Just like, oh, I like sports cars. Well, then maybe, you get pissed off about trucks or whatever, right? Like, it just creates the opposite, and it's like, you don't need that. Right? You don't need that in your life, because there is nothing there, right? And we start here. Opposites exist among the particular. They don't exist when you don't identify particular things. You don't have opposites. You have the one thing. You have you. you as God, you as Tao. That's all that's there. There is nothing else. And it doesn't need to be anything else. You don't have to identify one thing over another. You can just be here and experience this thing, and your desire to identify the particular things is how cemented you are, and how much you have cemented yourself into this manifestation, into this particular manifestation. And there's no necessarily, it's hard to get out of that, because that is that is something that feels good. The manifestation does feel good. So, because of this, the master doesn't rely on words. She teaches by being without explanation. In this way, she is the most helpful. She inspires all things to be without rejecting them. So you just allow, she inspires all things to be as they are. Like, imagine if you were inspired. I remember I hosted a 3 hour silent retreat. More or less silent. It wasn't all the 3 hours weren't silent. It was a retreat where we had, I think an hour and 40 minutes of quiet meditation in total. But I hosted this retreat, and one of the exercises that we went around and talked about was just like, okay, what do you have to say? And that's a hard question, and we all took, I think it was 5 minutes, to just say whatever we needed to say. And we weren't saying it to anybody. We were just saying it. It was just coming out. And it wasn't coming out so people can judge it, or so people could hear it. It was coming out so you could say it. And I always like to liken this to talking to yourself, but amongst others. And anything can come up and anything can come out. And someone took that point and just cried. And they were like, I don't know if I've ever been asked to just speak without purpose. And the reality is that in speaking from that place, you are speaking with so much purpose. It has so much purpose, and yet it doesn't have a goal. And that's the big difference. When you identify things, then you start to have a goal. You have a goal of knowing. You have a goal of remembering. You have a goal of having to accomplish something. You identify a tree, and you want to climb it, you want to cut it down, you want to get fruit off it, you want to do whatever, you want to love it. Right? There's a goal in there. But when you can teach without explanation, when you can have no goal, when you can just be here and love it all, no matter what it is. If a tree, it's a person, it's a mass murderer, it's a president, it's a house, it's a ball, whatever. Can you love it all the same as you love everything else? She inspires all things to be without rejecting them. She inspires them to be. She inspires them to be by not telling them who they are, not identifying them, not making them particular. I don't want you to be what I want you to be. I want you to be who you are. And if that means that you are a tree, then I want you to be that tree. And I don't want you to be a special kind of tree that benefits me in some way because you're beautiful, or because you're strong, or because you give me shade, or because you do anything for me. I want to love you because you're not particular. I want to love you because you are me, because you are the same as everything, and I love everything equally. She gives them life, but refuses to possess them. It's like a mother, right? Like here's one of the things that I talk to clients about sometimes when they're moms or dads and stuff, is like, they're not your kids. They're not your possession. You don't have anything to do with them other than they came out of your body in some fashion, right? Like, that's it. Now, yes, you have a responsibility to get them to 18, and maybe you want to be able to commit yourself to more than that, and with that comes like good for you, like you want to do that without hurting them. You want to do that without giving them any major trauma. That's great. Julie's coming up. But yeah, she inspires things to be without rejecting them, and she gives them life but refuses to possess them. And I know that, Julie, how are you today?
Hello, my darling. I have to be very, very quick,
Yeah.
but I do like your analogy of children, grandchildren, and trees
Mm-hmm.
because as you have a little seed and it drops off, maybe that's your kid, and
Yeah.
it grows into a little sapling, but it is in its own right a tree.
Yeah.
And as a parent tree, underneath the ground, the roots and the mycelia, I think they're called.
Yep.
It's like a fungus, and they send each other nutrients, and so they do it underground, unseen. But that tree is within its rights. It is its own creation. It doesn't belong to the seed, the tree that dropped it.
That's right.
And that's what children are like. And also people tend to, as a general, that's just a general thing I'm going to say. When you're looking at a kid, looking at it as a 6-year-old, say, one day that kid's going to be your age.
Yeah.
So when I chat to my grandchildren or my kids or anything, I always try and remember that inside their little bodies are these souls, these essences of life that will grow according to however they perceive the world. Not about
Yeah.
how I perceive it. It's from them.
Yeah.
So I treat them that way. They are not my property. They do not belong to me. They are not an extension of my life. They are individual, independent, separate beings. And all at the same time, they are connected with me.
Yeah.
Just
And
because they're
everything
alive.
else.
Yeah.
Like this one starts with like, don't identify the particular, right? Identifying the particular separates all things.
Yes.
And so when you can not separate, and you can be like, oh no, you are connected to all of this, and you have, like, I have to, just like I have to trust my hand is going to pick up my tea, I can
Yes.
trust you are going to pick up yours, right? Like whatever that means, that you're going to do your job,
My
right? Because
function.
right. I don't actually have to think anymore about picking up my tea, because it's going to happen when I want to drink my tea, right? Like I'm not going to be like, okay, reach out and get it, like, and that's why
Absolutely.
accidents happen, right? That's why we spill our tea sometimes. And that's why, because whatever, but it's like, that's okay. It's like those things happen almost we don't even really think about it. And that not thinking about it is happening underneath the surface from us, and it's happening within each and every one of us.
Yeah.
And when we think we have something to teach that 6-year-old, it's because we have some fear about something, or we are starting to separate things, and we're saying, well, if you do this, you're not good.
Yeah.
Because when I did that, I wasn't good, or whatever, however it kind of comes down the pipe.
Yeah. I'm going to teach you because my
Yes.
experience was this.
Right.
And I'm going to try and prevent you from that experience. But that in itself is impossible.
That's right. That's right. You
Yeah.
can't prevent that. And teaching is something that, like, that's a slippery slope. And that's why in this verse, in this number 2, it says she teaches by being without explanation.
Mm.
In this way she is the most helpful. And I was talking about that earlier. I don't know if you were on, but I was talking about that as being like, when you're without explanation, that means you're allowing other people to learn. You're not teaching anything. You're just allowing people to learn by
Yes.
observing. And that's what people do always, right? Like from the moment you were born, you were just learning all the time. No one was out there trying to they tried to teach you math, and they tried to teach you to read, and they tried to
They
teach you to be
failed.
a good boy, right? They, all of the things that they tried to teach us. But ultimately, we learned, and that's what was most important.
Yeah. We did it
There's zipping
anyway.
stuff up. Are you heading off on a trip?
I've got to go and pick up lovely Brooke
Oh,
and
Brooke, my bad.
also Georgie. Brooke's 6, Georgie's 9, and I've got lovely Millie over here. She's off school today. She's been
Yeah.
sick, but
Oh,
she is
Millie.
here. She's doing great with her football. She goes football training now. She's all
Oh
grown up.
man.
Oh my golly, there's a massive difference in her.
I'm so grateful for all of your grandkids. I'm so glad
They are
that you are
fab.
such a you have you're going to be an influence on each and every one of them, and that is such a that's a gift to the world.
And they gift me as well. They gift me as
Absolutely.
well. That's the thing. Right, I'm going to sign off. I love you so much,
Love
Martin. I
you.
just wanted to pop on and say hello. And just because I was listening to what you were saying, it was really ringing well with me. I was
Good.
just
Yeah.
observing.
Yeah. You're well on your way to being a master. This is wonderful.
Love you so much. Take
Love you,
care, my
dear.
darling.
Bye.
Bye bye.
And oh yeah, and now that you're off, I guess I can say, I'm not keeping track of the prem, but I hope the last couple times I checked on Nottingham, I didn't see that they were doing too hot, but I hope that turns around. Hull are dropping like a rock out in the championships. But we held a good spot for a little while. All right, Julie, you have a good day. Enjoy it. So as we wrap this number 2 up, this idea of identifying the manifestation, right? And this is the overarching concept. Like once you identify the manifestation, you start to close it off, and that's like when you identify children as children, and you identify them as being less than in some way, and all of those sorts of things. Like that gets us into a quandary. It gets us into we start to have problems there, because and so what we talk about the master is she's able to teach by being without explanation. So she's not trying to teach, right? Because teaching requires, in the way that we see teaching today, it requires explanation. You say, well, why? Well, why? Well, why this and why that and all of these things. But when you can be without explanation, she can be the most helpful for other people, because other people can observe and they can make up their mind for themselves. And hopefully they won't learn how to be, how to lump everything into an explanation. And that's the thing. Like, when you start to explain things, it gets us into this idea of the ego, and it gets us into this place of being like, well, I'm special because I understand. Look at how much I understand. And it's like, well, yeah, okay. You understand some things, but do you? Or are you just making shortcuts? The brain makes shortcuts. The brain makes shortcuts all the time, and that's okay. And we can make shortcuts and live within those shortcuts. Our brains can make shortcuts, and we can live within those shortcuts forever. Or we can start looking at things realistically, or we can start looking at things from a place of like quiet. Shortcuts are made so we can preserve calories, and the more shortcuts we make, the easier our life can appear to be, right? Because, oh well, I just go to work, I wake up, I get dressed, I put on my suit, I shower, I drink coffee, I put on my suit, I go to work, I come home, I eat dinner, I go to bed, and we in this cycle. Well, those are shortcuts. Each one of those is a shortcut. So you don't have to wake up every day and go, what today? Who am I today? And the thing is, the master wakes up and says, who am I today? And when they can wake up and say, who am I today? And step out and be who they are today, they don't have to explain anything, because they might not be this tomorrow. So they don't have to say, I like this or I like that. We can just say, this is what this is, because this is at this moment. And that's it. We don't have to do anything more than that. We can just be here and be present. And that's it. So this one wraps up with, her actions spring forth from perfection. See, and that's the thing, like the way this was written and the way I wrote this, I'll put, like, because that's me taking credit, because now I am differentiating. This is my translation, right? Like, I'm already like, this is why we talk about Tao. This is why I look at Tao, because I always want to get a little closer um, to understanding what I do and what I say. And when I say like my translation or this translation or whatever, I'm differentiating. And so it's important for me to stay open and realize that, like, no, it's not about my work. It's not about me. But what it says here is her actions spring forth from perfection. So, yes, she is perfect because she and all of us are perfect in this moment, but they spring forth from perfection, perfection being Tao, right? They spring forth. I mean, this could actually say her actions spring forth from Tao. They are not her own, thus, they will never be forgotten, right? I didn't understand that. My phone thinks I'm talking to it. So her actions spring forth from perfection, from Tao. They are not her own, and thus they will never be forgotten. And what that means is, like, they are now in the ether, and it has changed everything. Everything has changed because of the actions that have sprung forth from her, without her trying to manipulate, or without her trying to identify, without her trying to create a particular experience. Whatever her actions unfold into, whatever her actions unfold and create, those will never be forgotten, even if nobody ever knows that they happened. I appreciate you guys so much for joining me for Tao of the Day. Thank you, Julie, for joining me and talking to me about being a grandparent. That is, like, being a grandparent and being a parent, something that I will never experience. I love being an uncle, but I don't want the children. Um, and yeah, and that's some, that's a choice that I made a long time ago, and I really appreciate in my life. I get to explore me in a way that I think, having children and having people that you have to consider all the time in your life is something that one can't do, but you would get to experience and explore different things when you get that, right? Like, and I think that that's something that's really beautiful, and that's something that, I know Julie and I have spoken about as well. So, I'm going to read this one more time, then we're going to sign off. Unless someone has a number they'd like to pick, definitely step up and let me know. I'd love to hear, I'd love to go through another verse of the Tao, if someone has a number. Opposites exist among the particular. Identifying the beautiful creates the ugly. Identifying the good creates evil. Identifying the particular separates all manifestation. Reality and fantasy are opposing thoughts. Difficult and easy are opposing degrees. Long and short are opposing perceptions of time and space. Because of this, the master doesn't rely on words. She teaches by being without explanation. In this way, she is the most helpful. She inspires all things to be without rejecting them. She gives them life, but refuses to possess them. She is able to do this because her actions spring forth from perfection. They are not her own. Thus, they will never be forgotten. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me for Tao of the Day. This is Martin John. If you benefit from the work I do, definitely send me a message or reach out to me on Instagram. You can also send me a tip through Venmo at martinjohn_Garcia. And until next time, keep recovering yourself.